All right, so again, we're going deep today, like deep, deep, into someone's decades-long exploration of thought itself. Imagine personal journals, right? But like packed with sketches and diagrams and notes, all wrestling with these huge questions like, can we even build artificial consciousness? And not just like theorizing about it. This person was actually trying to like map out like an architecture
Yeah.
for how it could actually work.
Yeah, it's like we're tracing the evolution of this
Hmm.
big idea, right? We can actually see how they connected these insights from
Mhm.
neuroscience, computer science, even philosophy, all just scribbled down across like years and years of pondering this stuff.
So, okay, let's unpack this a little bit. The journal starts way back in the early 90s with this like
Yeah.
fundamental question, what even IS thought? Is it just like neurons randomly firing? And they start by like actually sketching out biological neurons and then trying to, model them digitally.
And what's really fascinating is they don't just stop at like the basic structure, right? They get into the actual mechanics of it. For example, they highlight this concept of decay, where neurons actively forget signals over time. It's like a built-in timer that prevents them from constantly firing.
So it's not just about receiving signals, but like how those signals are processed and importantly, discarded over time.
Yeah.
But how does this relate to like actually building an architecture for thought? What's the takeaway here?
Well, this decay mechanism, it's crucial for control and nuance, right? I mean, if every single signal triggered constant firing, our brains would just be completely overloaded with noise. So this selective forgetting allows for more sophisticated responses to new input.
So any artificial system aiming to actually like mimic thought, it would need a similar mechanism, right, for regulating the flow of information. Makes you wonder if our ability to forget is actually essential for like higher level thinking.
Precisely. And they also get into this concept of excitatory and inhibitory signals, like how neurons can either amplify or suppress the activity of other neurons. It's a move beyond, simple on-off switches to a more nuanced system of calculations.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's like they're dissecting the fundamental building blocks of biological thought, almost as if they're reverse engineering the brain to figure out how to build a new one from scratch.
Right. And this leads them to exploring the role of our senses in shaping thought. They break down each sense, sight, sound, touch, and so on, analyzing its evolutionary purpose. But what's really interesting is their assertion that our senses aren't just these passive inputs.
They actually drive our thoughts. How so?
They argue that our senses actively shape our perception of the world, influencing our actions and even sparking our imaginations. There's this great note where they write, why is a tiger in India important? Because it is beautiful and drives my imagination.
It's a beautiful example of how like a sensory experience can trigger this whole chain of thoughts and emotions. But what does this tell us about building artificial intelligence? Would an AI even need to experience beauty? Or is that like a uniquely human quality?
That's a question they really grapple with, yeah. They propose that an AI might relate to humans through shared experiences, but not necessarily through identical senses, right? Maybe instead of color vision, it could sense temperature gradients or something. The key is creating a system that can extract meaning from its environment, whatever that environment might be.
So it's not about replicating human senses exactly, but rather understanding the underlying principles of perception and how those principles could be applied to a different kind of system.
Exactly. And this focus on principles, it extends to their exploration of data compression and encoding. They even mention hashing as a way to efficiently represent information, suggesting that, the specific algorithms might be less important than the overall process of transforming and representing data.
Hashing. Okay, I'm going to need a bit more on that one. What is it and why did they think it was relevant to building like thinking machines?
Imagine taking a complex piece of information, like a sentence or an image, and reducing it to this unique code, almost like a fingerprint. That's hashing, in essence. The order of the original data doesn't matter as much as the overall content. It's a way to store and retrieve information efficiently.
So they thought the brain might use a similar system to process information. That's a pretty wild idea.
It is, and it highlights their focus on finding those fundamental principles that could be applied to both biological and artificial systems, right? They believe that understanding how the brain compresses and encodes information could be key to building an AI that can truly understand and interact with the world.
It's like they're looking for this like common language of thought, something that transcends the physical limitations of brains and computers.
Exactly. And the pursuit led them down some truly fascinating paths, including their exploration of a concept they called network state.
Okay, network state. What's that all about?
Well, they were moving away from the idea of the brain settling into a single final state after processing information. Instead, they envision a system that exists as this dynamic network of interconnected states, constantly shifting and evolving.
Right. So more like a dance than a destination.
A beautiful analogy. It's like our thoughts aren't these fixed points, but rather patterns that emerge from the complex interplay of information flowing through this network.
This is where it starts to feel like we're getting closer to an actual architecture for how thought could be built. Are we about to get into, like, their attempts to actually implement these ideas?
Hold on to your hat because things are about to get even more interesting. They begin to explore specific models of sensory encoding and pattern recognition, drawing on their experiences with computer programming and their observations of human cognition.
All right, I'm ready. Let's see how they tried to bring these abstract ideas to life.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, this person starts to really explore like how we actually make sense of the world. Even when the information we get is like incomplete or just messy. And remember how we were talking about the brain's ability to like recognize words even with jumbled letters?
Yeah, it's like our brains aren't just reading like letter by letter, but grasping the whole word,
Yeah.
because based on context and pattern recognition.
Exactly. And so they start digging into how that might actually be happening, drawing on their knowledge of computer science. And they propose that our brains might be using a process similar to hashing to encode and recognize these patterns.
Okay, so hashing, remind me again,
Right.
what is that? And how could it even apply to something as complex as like language processing?
Imagine taking a whole sentence, right, and condensing it into this like shorter, unique code. That's essentially what hashing does. The order of the words in the original sentence becomes like way less important than the overall meaning it conveys. It's like creating a fingerprint for like a chunk of information.
So maybe our brains aren't storing like every single letter and word perfectly, but rather generating these hash codes to represent like chunks of meaning.
That's the idea. And they go on to connect this to their earlier point about the importance of contrast. Remember how we talked about how the difference between silence and sound helps us perceive things?
Right, like those transitions help our brains pick out the important features.
Exactly. They suggest that our brains might use contrast to extract like these essential features from sensory input, which then get encoded into these half codes. And they even sketched out this like simple diagram to illustrate this whole process.
So let's talk about that diagram.
Yeah.
What did it look like?
It's pretty basic, with boxes labeled input slots representing sensors and states representing the output after processing. It seems like they were envisioning a system where raw sensory data gets transformed into this more compact and meaningful representation, potentially through this hashing mechanism.
So it's not just about capturing the raw data, but about extracting the essence of what's being sensed and encoding it efficiently. But is that even enough for thought?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And they ask it directly, is this thought? It's like they're wrestling with whether this process of encoding and pattern recognition is like a basic form of thinking, even if it's happening below the level of conscious awareness.
It makes you wonder, like, how much thinking is our brain doing all the time without us even realizing it? Like, is recognizing a face as a face already a form of thought?
It's a fascinating question, and they emphasize that this process of encoding it has to be learned and refined over time through feedback and reinforcement. They even suggest that this constant feedback might be how the brain verifies the accuracy of its internal representations.
So it's like the brain is constantly checking its work, comparing its internal model of the world to the actual sensory input it receives. And if there's a mismatch, it adjusts its model accordingly. Is that how learning happens, at least in part?
That's a great way to put it. And it gets to the heart of their interest in building an artificial system that can learn and adapt in a similar way.
Okay, so we've got this idea of hashing as a way to efficiently represent information. But how does that actually play out in the brain? Do they get into the nitty-gritty of how individual neurons might be involved?
They do. They start by pointing out that a single neuron, while capable of controlling a muscle, isn't enough for complex thought. They note that there are many more inputs than outputs in the brain, suggesting a process of simplification and generalization.
So the brain is somehow reducing the complexity of the world into a more manageable form.
That's what it seems like. They also mention inhibitors, which suggests that some neurons might actively suppress the activity of others, adding another layer of control to the system.
It's like this constant balancing act, with different parts of the brain competing for attention and resources.
Right, and then they bring up something totally unexpected, manic depression. They describe it as this innate, natural feedback loop that's gone haywire.
Whoa, that's a big leap. Are they implying that, mood disorders could be caused by malfunctions in these feedback mechanisms?
It seems like they're considering that possibility. They see these extreme emotional states as examples of natural feedback loops that have become stuck in a particular pattern, disrupting the normal functioning of the brain.
It makes you think about the delicate balance within these complex systems. Even a slight disruption can have profound consequences.
Exactly. But they don't stay on that topic for long. They circle back to their model of sensory encoding. This time, using the word dog as an example. They suggest that each letter in the word might be assigned a numerical value representing its position in the sequence, D plus 10 plus 2 G plus 3.
So they're trying to figure out how to represent sequences of information over time, like how we hear words unfolding in a sentence.
Right, and they even sketch out this notation, A, oo, oo, Z plus 1, A, oo, oo, Z 2 plus 2. It seems like a way to visualize how a sequence of inputs might be processed over time.
It's like they're trying to capture the flow of experience, the way our perception of the world is constantly updating and evolving.
Precisely. And they explicitly state that they're envisioning a simple network input layer that can start digesting words from letters.
Okay, so this is starting to feel like a more concrete architecture. They've got this input layer that's processing sequences of information, possibly using a hashing mechanism to extract meaning. And they're thinking about how feedback and reinforcement could be used to refine the system over time. It's still pretty abstract, but I'm starting to see how the pieces might fit together.
And they don't stop there. They go on to discuss the importance of context and memory in shaping our understanding of the world.
All right, let's dive into that. How do they see memory fitting into this architecture for thought? So we've got this input layer processing sequences, maybe using hashing, and there's feedback for learning. But where does memory even fit into all of this? It seems pretty crucial for any system that's going to actually, think.
Yeah, they were definitely grappling with that. They emphasize that any model of thought has to account for how memories are formed, stored, and importantly, retrieved. They even link memory directly to anticipation, arguing that our ability to predict what's going to happen next is based on our past experiences.
That makes sense. If you've been bitten by a dog before, you're probably going to be more cautious around dogs in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your memory of that experience shapes your anticipation of what might happen.
Exactly. And they go on to suggest that anticipation itself might be a key driver of thought. Like we're constantly making predictions about the world, and those predictions guide our actions and shape our perceptions.
So it's not just about reacting to the present moment. It's about using our past experiences to anticipate the future and make decisions accordingly. That's a pretty sophisticated level of processing.
It is. And they even suggest that these predictions, they don't have to be conscious. A lot of this anticipation might be happening below the level of awareness, shaping our thoughts and behaviors without us even realizing it.
Okay, so we've got sensory input, encoding, feedback, anticipation, and memory, all playing a role in this architecture for thought. But I'm still struggling to picture how it all comes together.
Yeah.
Did they ever try to build a system that embodied these ideas?
They did. Remember their work at the Vision and Cognition Lab? They were involved in an experiment on visual attention that directly informed their thinking about how to build a thinking machine.
Oh yeah, the one with the stream of letters and the target letter X. Refresh my memory on how that worked.
Subjects were shown this rapid series of letters, and they had to identify which letters came immediately after the X. What the researchers found was that after recognizing the X, there was this brief period where the brain basically stopped processing visual information.
It's like our brains took a little break after finding what they were looking for.
Exactly. They called it the attention blink. And the author of our journals was fascinated by this finding. They saw it as evidence that attention is an active process, not just a passive filter. It shapes what we perceive and how we experience the world.
So it's not just about what information comes in through our senses, it's about what we choose to focus on. And that focus, that attention, plays a crucial role in shaping our thoughts.
Right. And they connected this to consciousness, suggesting that attention might be a necessary but not sufficient condition for conscious experience. In other words, you can't be conscious of something unless you're paying attention to it. But simply paying attention doesn't guarantee consciousness.
It's like attention is the gateway,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a whole lot more going on behind the scenes to create the feeling of subjective experience.
Exactly. And they started thinking about how to build an artificial system that could similarly focus its attention, prioritize information, and make decisions based on what deemed important.
So they were trying to create an AI that could, in a sense, pay attention to the world in a meaningful way.
Precisely. And they started exploring different mechanisms for how that might work. drawing inspiration from both computer science and their observations of human behavior. They were particularly interested in how feedback loops and reinforcement learning could be used to train an AI to, focus its attention on what's relevant.
It's like teaching an AI to filter out the noise and focus on the signal, just like our brains do.
Exactly. And they believed that this ability to selectively attend to information was crucial for developing an AI that could truly understand and interact with the world in a meaningful way.
As we've been talking about all of this, I've been struck by how much, the author's thinking evolved over time. They started with these basic questions about neurons and signals, and they ended up exploring some incredibly complex ideas about attention, consciousness, and the very nature of thought.
It's a testament to their intellectual curiosity and their willingness to, keep asking questions and challenging their own assumptions.
And they never lost sight of their ultimate goal, to understand how thought emerges, both in biological and artificial systems.
And while they never claimed to have solved that mystery completely, they left behind a wealth of insights that continue to, inspire and challenge us today.
Well, I'd say this deep dive has been a success. We've journeyed through decades of someone's personal exploration of one of the biggest mysteries out there, the nature of thought itself. We've explored the intricate workings of neurons, the role of our senses in shaping perception, the power of memory and anticipation, and even glimpsed a possible architecture for artificial consciousness.
It's been an incredible journey, and it leaves us with much to ponder. The author's insights remind us that thought is not this static entity, but rather a dynamic process, a constant dance of information, feedback, and adaptation.
And as we continue to develop ever more sophisticated AI systems, it's crucial that we keep these insights in mind. The future of intelligence, both biological and artificial, is unfolding before us, and it's up to us to shape it wisely and thoughtfully.
Indeed. And as we venture into this uncharted territory, we would do well to remember the author's parting words. Sentience is emergent. What new forms of intelligence might arise from the complexity we're creating? That's a question we'll have to grapple with as we continue to explore the ever-evolving landscape of thought.
So until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep exploring the mysteries of the mind. This is The Deep Dive, signing off.